a teenage film snob, baby. I was a teenage film snob, baby.
Love, loss, grief, hope, and redemption. From staying up all night partying to staying up all night changing nappies. Ambition, frustration, self-love, and the failures in the journey of fatherhood. Laughter, tears, and Liv Tyler playing a sex-positive video store clerk. Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, and this is why you should watch Jersey Girl. Alright, today we're back. We're talking about a favourite film of mine, something I really love, a film that I think is incredibly underrated, and really was suffered due to the time of its release. It is, of course, Jersey Girl from 2004. If you've never heard of Jersey Girl, if you've never seen Jersey Girl, it was written and directed by Kevin Smith, who, if you've ever listened to this podcast, is someone I'm a huge fan of. I've seen all of his films multiple times, including all of his Evening With specials as well, which are really entertaining. And the reason this podcast exists is because of Smodcast, which is a show that he ran for 15 years or so. In fact, my whole mantra in this podcast, the idea that there are no bad films, came from an episode of Smodcast where he and Scott Mosier were talking about films. So I owe a lot of what I do to the work of Kevin Smith. And I want to shine a light on what I think is maybe his magnum opus. I know a lot of people are going to point to other films in his catalogue, and I know a lot of people are going to be surprised with the way I hold this film in such reverence. But I adore this movie, and I loved it the first time I saw it. I've seen it a bunch of times since. I watched it this week to prepare for this episode, and it hit me harder than it's ever hit before. It's an incredible film. Despite being dressed up as a bit of a cheesy rom-com, there's just so much more going on here. Kevin Smith, I mentioned, is the writer-director. You may know him from Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Clerks 2, Zack and Miri Make a Porno, Cop Out, Red State, Tusk, Yoga Hosers, Jay and Silent Bob, Reboot, Clerks 3, or the 4:30 movie. He's worked on a lot of movies. He's on TV work. He's on all sorts of stuff. That's most of his catalogue. The film was released in 2004, as I mentioned, by Miramax. Miramax, which was owned by the Weinsteins. I know that's a dirty word in film conversation these days, but whether you like them or not, and I don't think many people do, and that's more than fair enough, the Weinsteins are a part of film history, and the companies they built during the 90s and 2000s supported indie film when other studios didn't. So, if you like the work of Quentin Tarantino, if you like the work of Robert Rodriguez, chances are Miramax or Dimension or the Weinstein Company had something to do with them. This film was made on a budget of $35 million, which, again, we've talked about budgets in the previous episodes. $35 million for a mid-range rom-com starring Ben Affleck is actually quite low for the 2000s. Now they wouldn't even make a movie like this on that budget. And that's part of the reason why you see films that are like these Hallmark movies or Netflix movies that feel mass-produced. It's because they're putting out these types of films without a script or a solid script and on a much lower budget. That's why it looks like it's shot for TV, because they are. The film made $35.5 million at the box office. It would have done a lot more on DVD. This was during the home video boom. And Kevin Smith himself has admitted that whilst his films aren't always that profitable at the box office, they tend to break even or do okay. He had a huge home video market. A lot of his audience waited for DVD or video when Blockbuster was still around, and that's where his domain was. But Kevin Smith, one of the few filmmakers who has adjusted his budgets based on the times. If you look at any of his work from the last 15 years, I don't think any of them go above $5 million, which again sounds like a lot, but he sells his films before he releases them, so he's always turning a profit on them, which makes him a very bankable filmmaker. I mentioned Ben Affleck. The cast includes, of course, Ben Affleck at the height of Affleck fever. Raquel Castro plays Gertie. We're going to talk about her quite a bit in this episode because, boy, is she an absolute delight to watch. Liv Tyler, coming fresh off the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Jennifer Lopez in quite a small role. It was meant to be a lot larger. We'll talk about that as well. and the late great stand-up legend George Carlin in just an incredible role. He'd done a couple of things for Kevin Smith in the past, but this, I think, is his greatest performance. Now, Jersey Girl on IMDb has a score of 6.2 out of 10, which is respectable. 6.2 isn't terrible. It's not a bad movie per se, but it's definitely a lower score. Rotten Tomatoes, a lot less kind, 42% rating by critics and 48% from the audience. Now, before we talk about the film itself, let's do a brief history on the filmmaker and the film itself. So Kevin Smith made waves in 1994 with his independent debut, Clerks, a film I've talked about a lot on this podcast, which, despite a failed launch at the Angelica Film Festival in New York, found a second triumphant life at Sundance Film Festival, where it was bought by Miramax. There's an incredible documentary called The Snowball Effect, if you ever want to know the story of Clerks. And if you haven't watched Clerks, I just think it's seminal work. It's something that, if you are interested in the work of Kevin Smith, you need to watch. But if you are a film fan, if you like independent film, if you like workplace comedies, if you like raunchy comedies, Clerks changed everything. I've talked in the past about how it changed my life, but it changed the landscape of film. And we'll talk about that because Kevin Smith quickly established himself as the new, loud, young, profane voice of independent film alongside alumni Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, both of whom made their own debuts just a few years early, and both were Miramax kids as well. And the 90s has been long considered Smith's domain, releasing a variety of foul-mouthed comedies, including Mallrats, which we talked about, Chasing Amy, which is closer in tone to Jersey Girl, Dogma, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. His interconnected universe in a pre-MCU landscape, coupled with vibrant characters with natural, earnest dialogue, garnered him a rabid fan base, including myself, and established him as the voice of Generation X. I'm not Generation X, I'm Gen Y, or we call them millennials now, but his film spoke to me in a way that no other films had previously. I talked about how Clerks gave me representation on screen, and it might seem weird for a white man in his late 30s to talk about the importance of representation for himself. But just like how no one person is cut the same way, I couldn't watch, I would watch those films. I'd watch action films and comedies. I would never really see myself on there, but I watched Clerks and I was like, oh, that's me. Between the release of Dogma and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Kevin and his girlfriend, then girlfriend, now wife Jennifer Schwalbach, welcomed a baby girl, Harley Quinn Smith, into their lives. Harley Quinn has since appeared in she's appeared in just about all of Kevin's films, and she's a songwriter now, and she's in a band. She's got an acting career. She was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino film. She's got her own career, and she's really entertaining. She's got her own podcast as well. This foray into fatherhood gave Smith a new story to tell, opting to want to tell a more emotionally driven story akin to Chasing Amy, whilst also softening his edge to make a film that fathers could enjoy with their daughters. And I think that's something that people misunderstood about this. This is not a typical Kevin Smith film. It wasn't going to be a new direction for him, but it was a story he now wanted to tell. And he's talked about it a number of times in his Evening with specials. He actually talks about Jersey Girl and said, look, if I was never a father, I would never have made this film, but I am a father, and I had something new to say. I think that's natural of artists. Naturally, he cast Ben Affleck, his go-to for most projects. After all, Affleck could play the shark in Jaws. And Affleck's then partner, Latina pop star Jennifer Lopez. Jennifer Lopez is still in the news these days. She's still quite a big name, but in the 2000s, biggest pop star in the world. You couldn't turn on the radio without hearing a J-Lo song. You couldn't turn on the TV without seeing a music video. She was just massive. Now, the 2000s were a time where tabloid journalism was the scourge to Hollywood. It still is, but in particular, 2000 was a really rough time. The media dubbed Bennifer, and they were the subject of every headline, bringing unwanted attention to the set of the film Jersey Girl. And sadly, by the time the film had hit the editing suite, it was determined that the paparazzi and film-going public had had their fill of Bennifer. Ben Affleck and Jennifer might have been the first amalgamated couple name in all of Hollywood, to the best of my knowledge, and they were everywhere and everyone loved them until they didn't, and that hurt this film. Miramax head Harvey Weinstein, there's that name again, demanded that Lopez's role in the film be cut from a substantial entire first act role to just 15 minutes in the opening of the film. He kind of suggested that the anti-Bennifer public would really relish in the idea of J-Lo's character being killed in the first 15 minutes, which she does. She dies due to an aneurysm during childbirth, which sets the stage for Jersey Girl. And although he didn't agree with the decision, Kevin Smith did eventually make the cut. According to him, there's a 4-hour version out there somewhere. I don't think he'll ever release the 4-hour version, but there's an extended cut with a lot more J-Lo, and I think it would improve the film. The film is great as it is. I love it, but getting a bit more backstory on Gertie Sr. Would definitely do nothing but add to the film. Now, regardless of the cuts made and the short-lived anti-Bennifer movement, the film lives on in the shadow of its time, leaving it unseen to many film viewers, including many of Smith's more casual fans. A lot of Kevin Smith fans skipped this one. They heard the reviews, they heard that there was no cursing or kind of potty mouth jokes, and so they decided to skip it altogether, which is a real shame because, as I said, I think it is one of the highlights of his career. Before we go into the complaints, I'll give you a quick breakdown of the plot of Jersey Girl. So Ben Affleck and J-Lo fall in love. They work in New York City. Gertrude, played by J-Lo, falls pregnant. And then, as I mentioned, she dies in childbirth, leaving Ben Affleck he's like a media publicist. He's a publicist for musicians. As a single father who has to move back to New Jersey with his dad, played by George Carlin, and then commute to New York every day. And he's really struggling to adjust to being a single father. And he kind of always assumed that his wife would stay home and look after his daughter while he worked in the city. And what I really like about this film, and we'll talk about it more, is that he's not a perfect dad. In fact, he's a really flawed, problematic father, because even though he gives everything up to raise his daughter, he's always thinking about himself and wanting to go back to his life before his wife died. And there's an incredibly hurtful line he says to his daughter in the film, which we'll talk about later. And it shows like his kind of light bulb moment where he decides he needs to change and he needs to embrace being a father. So the complaints about the film, first of all, there was the anti-J-Lo / Bennifer sentiment, which we talked about in the history there. The drastic departure from Kevin Smith's more edgy comedy style, predictable rom-com plot, and overly sentimental. So let's break those down, and then I'll tell you why you should watch it. So the anti-J-Lo Bennifer sentiment, it's a real product of its time. Like, no one feels that way about either of those artists anymore. In fact, J-Lo and Bennifer got back together in the last few years. They're no longer together, but they did get back together, and people celebrated it. Now, that just might have been the nostalgia talking, but everyone was very happy to see them back together. So it's such a shame that in a time where we were so focused on, it couples and annoyed by them, that it impacted someone's art. That's a real bummer. But their chemistry is wonderful. You see in the first 15 minutes, like, they really work well together. And if people had watched the film, they probably would have realized, it's actually not that bad. The drastic departure from Kevin Smith's edgy comedy style, I talked about that in the history as well. It's just a different story. It didn't mean he was giving up telling dick and fart jokes. He was always going to go back to it, but he wanted to tell a personal story. He wanted to tell a story about being a father. He had something to say. And also, it's a way to reach a new audience. He wasn't giving up on the audience he had, but he wanted to tell something different. And I think it shows incredible restraint and artistic freedom to challenge yourself and do something different. There's a famous quote Prince said about Kevin Smith. There was a famous feud in the 2000s between Prince and Kevin Smith. And after Jersey Girl failed at the box office, Prince said, "That's what happens when the potty mouth don't work no more," which is a pretty funny quote from Prince. But again, I think that choosing not to watch a film or ranking it low because it doesn't have dirty jokes in it kind of closes you off to all these wonderful other films out there. Predictable rom-com plot. I don't think it's that predictable, but even if it is, like, why do we love the rom-coms that we do love? Because they fit a mold. I don't understand that. I don't understand, like, oh no, I went and saw a rom-com and it gave me exactly what I expected and wanted. Oh dear. What a terrible thing. And then overly sentimental. I don't think it is overly sentimental. I think it is sentimental. I think it's beautiful. And there are some really wonderful moments in it. But this is a rom-com about a single father that talks about porn habits and masturbation. Like, there's nothing sentimental about that. There are scenes where, young Gertie is playing doctor with a young boy, and they're showing, I'll show you mine if you show me yours first. Like that thing that kids all do. Like, it addresses realistic, grounded things in life. There's no change in his filmmaking or writing style other than it's not dirty. I don't think it's overly sentimental. It makes me cry all the time. And maybe I'm overly sentimental when it comes to watching movies, but I don't think it's a flaw. So let's talk about why you should watch it, because as I said, I adore this film. I think it's really, really wonderful. So first of all, the entire cast. Ben Affleck is firing on all cylinders here. I know that people consider him more of an action star, doing things like Armageddon and Paycheck, I guess, and Pearl Harbor, and then, of course, Batman later on. But I think Affleck is best when he's playing emotional, when he's playing kind. The best part of Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, a film that I think is fine, is Ben Affleck showing up and doing a monologue about being a parent. It's just such a beautiful moment. And that's why Chasing Amy was so well revered, because of, him playing a more emotional character. And watching Affleck be a father and learning to be a father, I think, is really important as well. He's not a perfect father. He's not a great father. He has to learn to be a father over the course of the film. And at the end of the film, he still doesn't have it. But he's learning, and that's what parenthood is. And if you're not a parent, and if when you watch this, you weren't a parent, maybe that's lost on you, and that's fine. But I first watched this when I was 18 years old, and I still got it. And maybe it's because my dad was a single father. But now watching as a father, it hits so much closer to home. But I think Affleck is incredible in this. He plays charming and funny and sad and broken and frustrated just incredibly well. And there's a sequence, and I'll talk about it now, towards heading into the third act of the film, where he gets an opportunity to go back to New York and get his old job back. It's been 7 years. He's been blacklisted. I didn't really talk about this, but he got fired from his role because he was trying to do a publicist job while having his baby daughter in the room, and he yelled at all the press and insulted them, and basically he got kicked out and blacklisted. But he gets a second chance, and he's going to get the job. It's going to happen. Or it looks like it's going to happen. He comes home to tell everyone the news, and he's the only one excited about it. His dad, played by George Carlin's yeah, but we've got a life together here now. You don't need to. And his daughter doesn't want to move because she's got friends and school, and she likes living with her grandfather. And then Liv Tyler, his, romantic interests, she kind of plays it off cool, but she cares about him, wants him to stay as well. And he ends up getting this huge argument with his daughter. And she's so mad at him that she says what a lot of children say to their parents at times, which is, I hate you. In fact, the line she says is, I wish mum hadn't died. I wish you hadn't said, I hate you. Which is tough for a parent to hear. Really tough to hear. If you've got children, they've probably said something hurtful at some point. I'm a father. My daughter has said hurtful things. They don't mean it. They're still learning to regulate their emotions. But she says that. And instead of being a patient, understanding father, because he's still learning and he's heavily flawed, he doesn't say anything reasonable. He turns right back to her. And this line crushes me every single time. Every time Affleck delivers this line, I burst into tears. It's so hurtful. He turns around to his 7-year-old daughter and he goes, I hate you too, you little piece of shit. You and your mother stole my life from me, and all I want is to get it back. Horrible, horrible thing to say, but so impactful. So impactful and so human and flawed, and just, I think it's a really brave line in a rom-com. I think it's a really brave line in a movie about being a parent. And no one talks about it. So his performance is incredible. Liv Tyler is wonderful. As I said, she's coming off the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and she's doing something a little bit more lighthearted. She's really charming and fun, and just everything you want Liv Tyler to be. Liv Tyler just plays a great girl next door, but it's not. She's not just the love interest. She's smart, and she's doing research, and she's very open about sexuality and stuff, and she's having these really important conversations. And she becomes a pseudo mother figure to Gertie in many ways. So she gets a lot to do, which is really great. But my two favorite performances in this film come from Raquel Castro, who played Gertie. And I think she was maybe 10 years old at the time, maybe even younger. And is so believable as a 7-year-old girl who just loves her dad. Her dad is the world to her and just means everything to her. And she adores him and she loves the life that she has. And she's so forgiving of her flawed grandfather. And just is the sweetest kid, but funny and charming, and it's a really brave performance. And there was some, media outlets at the time that criticized her performance. I was like, oh my goodness, we're blaming a kid for a movie? What are we doing? What's wrong with you? And of course, George Carlin. George Carlin plays Ollie. Ollie played by Ben Affleck, Ollie's dad, and he's kind of an alcoholic, and he's kind of a broken man. He's been a single father for a long time himself. His wife died years earlier, and he raised Ollie, and now he's raising Gertie. And he has a wonderful line as well that also breaks me at the very end of the film. Ben Affleck ultimately, changes his mind and doesn't go for the job, and he comes home in time and, spends time with his daughter at this play and stuff like that. And in the final scene, they're in a bar, and he's talking to George Carlin, and Ben are talking, and George Carlin goes to his son, you had me worried there for a moment. And Ben goes, I had to change. I had to do it for her. I had to be there for her. And George Carlin goes, no, it's not about her. I thought you were going to leave me. And Ben Affleck goes, well, surely you want some time to yourself. Don't you want to live alone? Don't you want to have the place to yourself? Don't you want to live alone? And George Carlin goes, not as much as I don't want to die alone. And it's so profoundly human. Like, there's big ideas and these strong choices in this rom-com that's accused of being predictable and overly sentimental, but it's so human. And, maybe it hits me more because my dad's a single man, and he is getting older, and he was living alone for a while. Maybe it hits me there, and it's something that I don't want. We did this whole focus on horror in the first year of this podcast, and turns out most people's greatest fear is isolation and being alone, and they're doing it in this rom-com about a single father. Oh, it's so beautiful. So the casting is why you should watch it. The story, I've kind of bled into that as well. I think the story is wonderful, and I think, we don't get a lot of stories about single dads, a lot of stories about single mums, and they're wonderful. In fact, I'm going to talk about Catch and Release later on in this series. Catch and Release is all about a single mum as well. But we don't get a lot of single dad stories. And when we do, the dads are flawed and they don't want to improve, and they want, they're kind of terrible influences. This is a guy who learns to be better. And that leads into my next point, which is a kinder and gentler presentation of fatherhood, and embracing the mistakes. One thing I hear a lot about fatherhood lately is in a TV show called Bluey. If you're a parent, you're familiar with Bluey. Bluey's a cartoon. It's an Australian cartoon, and it's about this family in Queensland. And people say that Bandit, the father, is unrealistic because he's a perfect father. But people are missing the point of that as well. Bandit is not perfect. He's far from perfect. He's incredibly flawed, but he owns his flaws. He tries to be better. He apologizes to his children when he makes mistakes. So he's a great role model for fathers, but he's not a perfect father. But, 20 years before Bluey, or 15 years before Bluey, we had Jersey Girl, and Ollie Trinky is that. He's learning to be a better father. I think the jokes are really funny as well. There's a whole subplot where Gertie has to do a musical number for a school. They're doing a performance at the end of the year, and everyone's doing Cats, which is really funny. Keep doing it, and there's a montage of everyone doing Cats, and she wants to do Sweeney Todd. And Sweeney Todd, if you don't know, is a really violent musical about a guy who, cuts the throats of his customers, and then the woman downstairs puts them into meat pies. And the song they sing is called God That's Good, and they're at a Catholic school, and the teacher thinks it's a hymn. There's some really wonderful jokes in there. Just because it's PG-13 doesn't mean it's less funny. It's just curated to a different audience. And the last reason you should watch it is the tears. Maybe you won't cry watching it, and that's fine if you don't. But it hits me so hard every single time. I think it's such a beautiful film. I think it's incredibly well crafted, and it tells an important story. So those are my thoughts on Jersey Girl. It's a film I love. I've loved it since I first saw it over 20 years ago now, or around 20 years ago. And every time I watch it, it hits. I watched it this week, and the last half an hour, there were lots of tears. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's such a gem, and such a brave film for a filmmaker who could have very easily continued doing the same thing every single time. And Kevin Smith's done this a few times. He pivoted after Jay and Silent Bob to do Jersey Girl. He went back to what he was known for, and then he pivoted into horror for a few years, then he pivoted back. He does change his career and mix it up. But I think this is a brilliant film, and it's so worth your time. So go and watch Jersey Girl. Tell me what you think. Maybe you think I'm wrong, maybe you think I'm crazy, and that's totally fine. But those are my thoughts on that wonderful film, and that is why you should watch Jersey Girl. I'll see you next week.